You give me the go. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's a small session, so it would be great if it would be interactive. For those who don't know me, I'm Nicolas Fränkel. I'm a hybrid SAP developer. I'm a consultant, so the answer is always it depends. I'm also learning Russian. Иногда. Но мне очень трудно, блин. So I work for Hybris. Hybris is a provider of an e-commerce platform based on Java and Spring, so this is my main expertise. But recently I found that Kotlin was really, really great, and I decided to get into it. So this talk is called How to Design a DSL in Kotlin. So perhaps let me refresh. What is a DSL from Wikipedia? A DSL is a computer language that is specialized into a very specific domain, as opposed to a general purpose language where you can do anything with it, just like Java and Scala. And here is a little table example. So, for example, you have XML, and it's a general purpose language. We can call it a language. And out of this general purpose language, we can create domain-specific language like HTML or XHTML, MATML. And in Java, the DSL are mainly focused on the assertions frameworks. So you might know some of them, like assert-G, fast-assert, and that kind of stuff. So it describes very well the domain of assertions, and it makes the assertion much more fluent than assert equals something. And in Kotlin, I don't know, who already knows Kotlin here? Okay, half the room. Great, guys. There is a DSL called Anko. So who here is an Android developer? One guy. So you know Anko. Anko really is the way that you create your screens in Kotlin, in Android, sorry. Generally, when you create your screens in Android, basically you have to describe them in XML, and then you bind them in your Java code, and it's really hard to make the binding. It's not that hard, but it requires a lot of boilerplates, and Anko makes it super easy to do the binding, but you can also completely replace the XML by Anko. So basically, you have the feel of a declarative a language, but it's still a language, so you can still do stuff that you cannot do in XML. And there is Cardin. So Cardin is the example I will take. This is my own DSL to create a Vaadin DSL. So in Java, there are already a few methods to create a DSL. You can, basically, the easiest is to call each method in sequence. It's not really a DSL, but it gets the job done. The second way is to have method chaining. With method chaining, for example, when you have a setter, instead of not returning, you return this, and then you can call set A, set B, set C, set whatever. Or if you don't like this kind of stuff, you change the set with a with, so with A, with B, with A. And this is another way to have this feeling of a DSL. You can also have nested method calls, and that you find a lot in the assertions framework or lambdas. You can read more about it in the article that is linked there. So here is an assert-G sample, and basically you have method chaining, you have lambdas, and you have nested methods. So you've got everything here. It works pretty well. It makes your assertion more fluent, more readable, and that is the basics of the DSL, to get more readability. And now comes Kotlin, which is, from their website, a statically typed programming language for JVM, Android, and the browser. And you might have learned recently that it's also for JavaScript. So you can compile or you can transpile your Kotlin code to JavaScript or to native code. So you can have an executable that runs on Windows, on Mac, on Linux. Directly, you create your program in Kotlin, and then you've got a real executable. So this is still experimental. JavaScript is not anymore. So you can have every one of your team develop in Kotlin and then create a full-fledged application. The backend will be bytecode, the front end will be JavaScript, but everything will be Android, will be Kotlin, not Android. Some facts about Kotlin. It is provided by JetBrains, and again, recently, they're at Google I/O 17, so it was last week. Google announced that first it supported Kotlin on the Android platform, so it's a first-class citizen, which is a really big move, and that they will probably partner with JetBrains to have an organization to get the stewardship of Kotlin together. So it's not a very small language developed by a company. Google is another company. It's not the smallest one. So it's really good news. It also is a very good sign because now it cannot be closed source anymore. It will stay open source probably forever. As I said, it compiles to bytecode, JavaScript, and native. And for me, it's a simpler Scala. I've tried Scala. It changed my way to develop Java code for sure. But you can do a lot with Scala. You can do too much. And again, the point is not to be able to do many different things, is to be readable. So some Kotlin features. So it's of course object-oriented and functional, like Scala. It's statically typed, so you don't need more tests to check the type system. Very important, it's null safe by default. So for every type that cannot be null, there is an equivalent type that can be null, and one is not equivalent to the other. So you have to check whether it's null and then to cast it into the non-nullable type. And that is very important. It really prevents a lot of stupid null pointer exceptions or a lot of null checks that you don't know in Java whether it can be null or not. There are no checked exceptions. So checked exceptions were a super good idea on paper, but in practice doesn't work so well. You have named and optional arguments. We will see lambdas and many different things. Some of them we will see later. Who knows about the Vaadin web framework? Oh, guys, yeah. So I would say 1 and 2 half people. Okay, too bad because my example will be about the Vaadin web framework. And for that, I'm sorry, but here, Vaadin is a framework that lets you develop your UI in Java. So you don't need to know about JavaScript and everything. And it's based on components, real components. So if you know Swing, you won't be lost. So what I mean by components is then you've got inheritance, you've got composition, all the good things that you lose when you are doing JavaScript on your own. And of course, it's event-driven, so you can send event and listen to them. So this is a sample Vaadin UI, and even if you have never seen any Vaadin code, you can understand that first I set a theme, then I create a layout, I put stuff in the layout, and I set the contents of the screen as a layout. That's pretty straightforward. So our goal for the DSL, the Vaadin DSL, is that it will look declarative, but it will be code. Something like that. And if you know Anko, for example, it looks a lot like Anko. It's the same recipe. So, what feature can we leverage? That's what we are going to see right now. Enough talk. The truth is in the code. So this is my UI in Vaadin. And the problem with this code is that, well, I can do whatever I want, wherever I want. So for example, here I set the margin, but the margin can be set there also. The components, so the order is relevant, the order where you add the components, but I can declare the text field before, it won't change anything. Or I can just move that below, won't change anything. It all depends on your feeling, on the developer, on the time of the day, on the amount of coffee that you drank. And I mean, if you start having bigger methods, it's hard to read and it's hard to maintain. And so it's a recipe for bugs. So how can we do better with Kotlin? The first stuff is we will create a Kotlin class, and we will say it's a Kotlin UI. And because I'm super lazy, I already wrote everything there. So that's my first stuff. It doesn't do much. Here, for those who are not familiar with Kotlin, you can already see that the class declaration and the constructor are bounded together in the first line. So here I say, this Kotlin UI class extends the UI class, and it extends the no argument constructor. So I'm just saying Kotlin UI as a no arg constructor as well. The difference here is that if I override something, it's required to tell it to the compiler. I override, so to make you aware that, yeah, I'm doing something here. The first feature we will leverage is properties. So in Kotlin, you don't have really getters and setters. You have vals and vars, so mutable and immutable properties. And obviously, if it's not an internal variable, by default, if it's an immutable, you will have a getter, but no setter. And if you have a variable, so a mutable property, then you will have both getters and setters. But we can still access them in the usual way, but generally it's recommended to access them through properties. So how do you do that? Well, if you've got a setter, then you just say property name equals new value. Simple stuff. Now, let's do something better. We want to add a layout. That was the initial stuff. We want to add this kind of layout, a vertical layout. So how would we do it in a very naive way? Well, in a naive way, we would do something like that. So an object is just a placeholder for a singleton. And we create inside of it this vertical layout method, which takes a UI parameter. And then we create the layout. We set the content, and we return the layout. And inside this method, then we say UI utils dot vertical layout, this. That's what you would do in Java. So this is using a Kotlin syntax, but this is what you would do in Java. Everybody agrees that? No question? Does it look good to you? Not so much. Huh? I mean, it doesn't feel like a real DSL. Now we can leverage the second nice feature of Kotlin. It's extension method. And only for that, you should use Kotlin, because it's mind-blowing. So instead of saying that this function be declared in an util class, then we say that it will extend the UI class, and we can write like this. Mind-blowing. Who understood the trick? Who didn't? So everybody understood? Perfect. And of course, at this point, we can dispense with this argument, and we say this content equals layout. And so with extension functions and extension properties, we can have real proper object-oriented code. So if you know Yegor, who knows Yegor? Only 2 people knows Yegor and object-oriented paradigm. Sorry? Yegor Bugayenko. Yeah, Yegor. Who knows Yegor? Ah, better. So that would make him very happy because he always bitches about static and utility classes, and this makes it really like his dream. And in that case, I agree. The code is much cleaner. It really feels like object-oriented. What we can do also in Kotlin is that I told you it's a functional language, so there is this nice method called apply. So we can do that like this. What did I do? 2 seconds, please. Sorry? Yes, and I will take it there. Sorry. So in that case, apply. Where do I find apply and show it to you? This, we will get back to it in some time, but just understand for now that inside this apply block, this now is a vertical layout, and content is still the UI. Okay? What we can also do right now is to, instead of creating it here and then returning it, then we can already return that. Much better. And now it becomes a one-liner, and since it's a one-liner, we can change it to that, thanks to this expression body syntax. Even better, I mean, everybody understands here that what will be returned is a vertical layout, so we can dispense with the return type because it's inferred. Mind-blowing. I mean, it's the same trick. It's the same cheap trick as in Scala. There is nothing really great here, but it works. The really good stuff is there is no implicit. It's only extension function, and that makes it great. Okay? Everybody is happy with that? So now we would like to manage the margin and the spacing. Okay, so we will create another function that says like margin, boolean, and spacing, boolean. And then we can say in the vertical layout, so is spacing equals spacing, and margin equals, don't worry about that, about the Vaadin API is just not very important at the moment, so I should say this dot margin because it's not a parameter here. Something like that, okay? Yeah, and now I would like to also set one or the other. So here I have to decide I want margin or spacing because I cannot not have both because it's the same type erasure. Huh? Not type erasure, but it's the same signature. Both will be Boolean. So what do you decide, spacing or margin? Spacing? Spacing? Spacing. Okay. And now I can call anything here. So I can call it without any parameter. I can call it with 1, or I can call it with 2. So anybody can tell me here what the first and what the second? Spacing or margin? Come on, that's your job when you do Java. If you have 2 Boolean really, I'm not kidding. If you are a Java developer and you call a method with 2 Boolean parameters, it's your job to know that. Right or wrong? How many of you know it by heart? Okay, that's true. No, that's a very good point. IntelliJ, not any ID. IntelliJ in the latest version, yeah, so it's really a trick, and there are a lot of bugs there, so we will give you the name of the argument. That's true, that's completely right. It's a very good feature, actually. But, I mean, I would like to do that without the IDE, or if I'm using Eclipse or NetBeans or VI. Anything. I would that to be baked into the language. So the first is margin, and the second is spacing. No problem, guys, because here we can say margin and spacing. That's a very good question. What do you think? Yes. Named parameters. Named parameters reduces the probability of bugs to 0 if you use them, because you are not required to use them. But it makes the readability and the maintainability of your code much better. So that's good. But I still have this problem about my second method, which basically has one single argument. I don't know whether it's passing, so I cannot write that, for example. Mnie pipiec. And I don't like that. So what we can do is to have something like that. We remove everything, and we set that to a default value. And it works. So now, because of named parameters and default values, you can pass no arguments, you can pass any arguments, or you can pass both arguments, depending on your choices. It's not bad, right? So it looks quite nice. Now, my next move will be to write something like that. That was a promise in my slides, you remember? And I want to write label here and what have you. That's something. And here it tells me, hey, there is a problem. Okay. So let's do it bit by bit. We will add a third argument. And let's do it easily. Sorry. We will say vertical layout dot anything unit. And we need, of course, to set a name to it. And now you see that I can add here a lambda as an argument. So here I have to say init equals, but otherwise I can write that. Okay? Now, because it's the last argument, I can set it outside the braces. Okay? It's just syntactic sugar. Nothing wrong with that. Still following? Any question? Perfect. You are smart. It's Ukraine. I love that. Now, I told you about that here, you see that it's not any lambda that I'm passing. It's a lambda which is prefixed with a class name. And this is called a lambda with the receiver. That means that here, anything that is in the lambda, it's a vertical layout. Okay? So it's a vertical layout. If I remove it, it's not the vertical layout anymore, it's the UI. Okay? Because here this refers to the UI, but if I pass the vertical layout as that, then it becomes this object. Okay? What I will do now is that then I will say I will apply whatever happens in the init function to the vertical layout. Хорошо? Perfect, I love that. So now I can use width using the property width 500 px. Sorry, what happens? Val cannot be reassigned. Yeah, sorry about that. I have to say set width in that case. And set height, I don't know. Okay? So here, those methods will be set into the lambda. This lambda will be passed to the vertical layout and then will be applied to the object. Okay? Next step. I'm still very lazy. So here, I did the exact same trick as here. I create an extension function called label. That label has the same lambda receiver, but here, instead of being a vertical layout, it applies to the label that I'm creating. So now I can write something like that. Works for you? Okay. Yeah, doesn't work for me, because I would like to write something like that. Yeah, I'm lazy. Il y a l'inévi française. And of course, it tells me, no, that doesn't work. So what I can do is to have the value here, which is of type string. By default, it will be nothing. And I create the label already with the value here. Now it works. So now I can write it like that. I can write it like that and say this dot whatever adds a listener. So when something happens on the label, I do something. Okay? Let's go further. Now I would like to create an HTML. So I say hello world. I will say hello JEEConf. So this is HTML. And in Vaadin, I have to say, hey guys, you have to interpret it as HTML. It's not standard text. So I say content modes equals HTML. So it would be something like that, content modes.html. Yeah, now it works. Okay? But it would be super great instead to have something like that. HTML would be great, right? Then I could write more stuff like here. Yeah, let's do that. Issue l'INV. So here, that's what I did. And I can remove that one. How did I do that? Well, that's easy. I created this function, which takes a string. Here I have no default value, but I could have one. I mean, that's not very important. And I call the label function here with the same value. and saying content mode equals and applying the same stuff. Now, the result is the following. So remember, that was our original code, where I told you, hey, I can't put it in any order I want. It's not readable, it's not great. I mean, even the set content could be set here, or the text field could be set here, and the vertical layout could be set. I mean, it's really crazy. And now I have something that is ordered by default. Oh, what did I do? I have something that is ordered by default. The only thing that can be still ordered is a theme, of course, but the rest, the vertical layout wraps the rest of the stuff. And here I could probably create more functions to have a vertical layout inside the vertical layout and stuff, and so on and so forth. Because, of course, here I say UI, vertical layout, but that is, I mean, that's just to show, but normally I should say as components. So everything that has a component can have a vertical layout. And then, depending on the real implementation, I should say, okay, set content or whatever. Any question for that? How do you like it? I mean, zero bug afterwards. Shoot, shoot. So, back to the presentation. So why not Groovy? Who here is a Groovy developer? René. Okay. It already exists. You can already create DSLs in Groovy, right? This is the kind of stuff. And that is very similar. Looks very similar. The problem is you don't use the same features to achieve the same things. Because in Groovy, Groovy is a scripting language. So that means that, A, you don't know the type. And though you've got bugs that might be creeping because of this reason. So you would create more tests, which takes more time. So if you are already using Groovy, be happy with Groovy, really. I have nothing against Groovy. But if you want to start creating DSLs out of the box and you don't use Groovy, then perhaps you have some reason to use Kotlin instead. Why not Scala? Who here is a Scala developer? Sorry, guys. That's easy trolling. Well, as I said before, Scala is super powerful. Again, if you are using Scala, you are happy with it, use it. Just keep in your corner. But no, be happy about that. The problem with Scala is that kind of stuff. You can create DSLs in Scala that emulate BASIC. You recognize BASIC? Yeah. So you can do a lot of weird stuff. And in my opinion, too much. How do you achieve that? With the keyword implicit. With the keyword implicit, you can change this number, for example, to something else. How do you do that? You import a function. And because above there is this import function, then it's not a number anymore, it becomes something else. And the problem is that in my everyday life, I'm fighting against assumptions. I'm fighting against implicit stuff. I'd like, when I'm dealing with business, to make everything explicit. Now the Scala guys, sorry about you, they are so slow that they baked the implicit into the language. And that gets very hard for me to read and to understand. I mean, if you are the one who developed the code base, might go. If you are just a regular, normal, object-oriented, a little functional guy who happen to maintain the code base, it's very hard, in my opinion. So again, if you're happy with it, keep with it. But yeah, for me, it's too implicit. So some takeaway about that. So I asked you what feature can we leverage. So the first feature of Kotlin, which basically, I'm sorry for that, but Scala has not so much, is 100% Java interop. You can migrate a Java project bit by bit with zero overhead. You don't need a big bang because, yeah, the language doesn't play nice with what exists. And basically, that's what the JetBrains people are doing. They migrate their IntelliJ bit by bit. The second is don't use getters and setters, use properties because it makes the syntax a little cleaner. The greatest stuff since the birth of the universe is extension function. As you can see, it makes the code really object-oriented with zero overhead. And then by using named parameters and default values, you can have a very one single signature, one single constructor, not like in Java, where you have to have override like 5 or 6 signatures to have all the combination, and you are still missing the one that you want to use. That's a nifty feature, by the way, if you happen to develop on the Android platform where the API really sucks. Let's tell it as it is. Where you have like 7 or 8 parameters, and every time you have to tell null, 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 because, I mean, now you create one wrapper function over that one with default values, and it makes it much easier. Then there is the lambdas with receiver, as you can see, and that completes what we saw in this presentation. I didn't mention 2 things. First, there is this operator overloading. So it's not like Scala operator overloading. You cannot use smileys, for example, emojis as operators like C. It's limited to a very limited subset, just like in Groovy. But if you happen to play with distances or with units and stuff, then you can use plus, minus, divided, whatever you want to override. And also there is something I didn't mention because I didn't use it. You have this infix keywords that if you want to define a function, you can define it as infix. In that case, it must take a single parameter, and then you can omit the parentheses. So again, it's a little nice syntactic sugar, and it works pretty well. Now I guess it's time for some question. You can read my blog, it's always fun. I always have people bitching about what I'm writing, which is a little less than Yegor, but still it's nice. You can follow me on Twitter, you can hire me on LinkedIn, and more importantly, you can have the source for the code that I showed you on GitHub. I will tweet the slides anyway, but if you want to take pictures, of course, then you can do it. Or do it more manually by hand, but I'm too lazy for that. So any questions?
Do you have any
questions,
guys? Maybe with the microphone it will be better because we are recording all.
First of all, thank you for very interesting presentation. It's very impressive. And my question is, as I can understand, it's about internal DSL, yes?
Yes.
But what about external DSL in Kotlin? Do we have something? Because, of course, we can use NTLR, but do we have something special for Kotlin, for external DSLs?
Okay, so first, please define internal and external.
Internal, it's part of language. For example, we can create something in Scala, in Kotlin, in anything languages, what will be DSL, and in the same time it will be part of the language, extension of some language, of Scala language, of Kotlin language, and external DSL, it's something what isn't part of the language. For example, if I have some file with settings, I can parse it with NTLR, without NTLR, with some other library.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's a good question. If I this is a real project, so you can go and see the Kotlin project. If you use it with Java, then you will lose everything that I've described here. I mean, that's a problem, because in Java you don't have name arguments, you don't have properties, you don't have everything like that. So, no, it's still a Kotlin file. It's still part of the Kotlin, it uses the Kotlin libraries, so you have to use it with at least a JVM compliant language, and then you will lose every nicety that you might have in the first place. So sorry, it doesn't work like that.
So we need to use only untiler or some Java library, and we have not some special for Kotlin, like untiler. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Other questions? So the question is, what about the Java bytecode compatibility? As I told you, Kotlin compiles to bytecode, compiles also to JavaScript or to native. So it runs on the JVM.
Yeah, but what version of the bytecode? It's bound to JVM 1.8 or?
So right now, the latest Kotlin version since 1.1, if I remember well, it's 1.8, if I remember well. Now, the version I used before, I think Kotlin is compatible with 1.7. And you can, in the previous version, if I remember well, it was compatible with Android, so it was even 1.6.
And how it's compatible with 1.6 or 1.7 when you use lambdas?
Magic.
Okay.
No, the JVM is agnostic whether you use lambdas or not. The thing is, I mean, if you remember well, in Apache Commons lang, there were also already those kind of function and stuff. So you could already use, yeah, you could.
Same as Java stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is that the JVM lets you do a lot of stuff. It's the language that constrains you doing one thing or another. I mean, you can. It's like saying, hey, but what about those type system? I mean, it's crazy. I'm doing Groovy. Groovy, well, the JVM doesn't give a about type system. It's the language that constrains you.
Okay, so I can write in Kotlin and then compile it to Java 1.7, for example.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Thank you.
Only 1 minute left,
so that means either one long question and answer or two very... Sorry, Scala already has its turn.
I have a question about the DSLs that I saw existing in Kotlin, like these basic ones for HTML, CSS.
Yes. So
what is the state? What is the state of these things?
I think the HTML stuff was just as an example. The real one that is really, really developed and used is Anko, which is for Android, which lets you define your UI for Android. But I think HTML was just for fun. You might check, but I'm not really sure you should use it.
Because there was the thing called Kara, I think it was called Kara platform. It looked like you could write a full application in Kotlin, full web application in Kotlin.
I don't know about that, unfortunately. No.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
One more question, and then it will be the end.
Everyone agree? So we could one more question because it's... Thanks.
So all those DSLs add additional layer of abstraction. Would you think it's good to maybe turn everything into DSLs? Because, like, for example, in Scala world, we have a mess sometimes because it's so hard sometimes to understand what DSL does and how it works. What would be your advice maybe when we shouldn't use it?
It depends. No, the question, I mean, again, I showed you what crazy stuff you could do in Scala. That you cannot do in Kotlin. And I mean, it's a good idea, right? In Kotlin, what you could do is to create an extension function on number, and then you would have dots between the 10 and the print, which at least makes it very clear that you're calling something. But for my code itself, I will stay there. I mean, isn't that clear? Isn't that clear? If it's not clear, let's talk about that. But for me, I think that it's pretty clear, even if you don't need to read the documentation. If you know the Vaadin API, you know already that kind of stuff. You know the vertical layout, HTML, text field. I mean, it's super simple. It's like for any library. It's up to the designer of the library to constrain the user not to make any bugs, to make it very clear. And I mean, it's really the responsibility of the designer. And I hope that is pretty self-evident when you read that. You can try, you can use the Kotlin and try, and with this kind of auto-completion, then it's very easy to use. And if it's not, then you are welcome to send me a feedback saying, hey, this is not very self-explanatory, please do something. I try to use it myself, so I have a demo application that uses every component, and I tried, when I use it, to be the customer of my own library in order to have feedback. Of course, it's not very easy because you are used to what you are doing, but a good test would be to take a developer who has no idea, who just know the basic stuff and tell it, hey, use it and please give me feedback. I mean, but that's true for not only for DSLs, that's true for any library creator.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.